He caught her wrist before the knife slipped, and for a moment, neither of them let go. So why did she look like she was already planning to leave? The wind pushed hard against the ranch door, rattling the loose hinge as a lantern swung overhead. Graham's grip stayed steady around her hand, firm but careful, as blood traced a thin line across her palm. She didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just watched him, like she was measuring something he hadn't said. Outside, a horse passed too slow for a traveler, and voices carried faint across the yard. Graham noticed. So did she. Her fingers tightened once, then stilled, like she'd already made a decision he didn't understand. If you've ever had to choose between staying and disappearing, tell me, what would you have done? The wind moved slow across Silver Mesa that morning, dragging cold over the dry earth like it didn't plan on leaving anytime soon. Graham Tate stood by the ranch gate, one hand resting on the top rail, watching the narrow road cut through the hills. It wasn't much of a road, just a hard line worn into the land by wagons and stubborn men. He saw her before he heard the horse, a single rider, straight-backed, no hesitation in the way she handled the reins. She didn't wave, didn't call out. When she reached the gate, she swung down without asking for help. Her boots hit the dirt clean, no wasted movement. She tied the horse herself, quick and tight, like she'd done it 1,000 times. "Ruth Bellamy?" Graham asked. She nodded once. "You're Mr. Tate." Her voice was steady, not soft, not sharp, just sure. Graham opened the gate, didn't say anything else. He wasn't much for talking, and she didn't seem like the kind who needed it. The kitchen sat at the back of the house. Old wood, iron stove, a table worn smooth by years of use. He'd kept it going after his wife died, but only just. Enough to eat, not enough to care. Ruth stepped inside and paused. Not long, just a second. Her eyes moved, knife rack, stove, water basin, dry goods shelf. She didn't touch anything, just looked. Then she set her bag down and went to work. By the end of the first day, Graham noticed small things. The knives were no longer crowded together. The heavier ones sat closer to the cutting board. The coffee tin had been moved within arm's reach of the stove. A clean rag hung where a man wouldn't think to put one, but where a hand could find it without looking. By the second day, the kitchen felt different. Not bigger, not better, just right. Graham stood in the doorway that evening, watching her move between stove and table. No wasted steps, no noise except what was needed. The kettle lid lifted, the fire adjusted, the spoon tapping once against the pot, then still. "You done this before," he said. She didn't turn. "I've cooked." That was all she gave him. He nodded once, though she didn't see it, and stepped back outside. That night, the cold came harder. Graham lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling beams, listening the way a man does when he lives alone too long. Every sound had a place. Every creak meant something. Then he heard it. A click. Pause. Another click. He sat up. From down the hall, faint but clear, the sound of a lock turning. Then another. Then the scrape of wood dragged across a floor. A chair, blocking the door. Graham lay back down slowly, said nothing. Next night, same thing. Third night, too. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. By the fourth day, the wind shifted, came down from the ridge sharp enough to sting the eyes. Graham was out by the woodpile when he heard the split go wrong. A dull crack, then silence. He turned. Ruth stood there, the axe half buried in a log, her left hand hanging at her side, fingers tight. Blood slipped down along her wrist, Not much, but enough. Graham crossed the yard in 3 strides. Hold still. She didn't argue, didn't pull away, just watched him. He took her hand, rough and warm despite the cold, and turned it gently. The cut wasn't deep, but it had opened clean. He pulled a cloth from his pocket, pressed it firm, then guided her toward the house. Inside, the fire had settled low. He stirred it back to life, then sat her down by the table. She didn't sit all the way, just enough. He cleaned the cut with water from the kettle, his hands careful in a way that didn't match the rest of him. You'll keep it dry, he said. I know. He wrapped the cloth tighter, not rushed, not slow, just steady. When he finished, he didn't let go right away. Neither did she. The room held still. No wind. No fire crackle loud enough to break it. She looked up then, not long. Just enough. He leaned in without thinking, and she didn't move back. The kiss wasn't soft, wasn't rough. It was quiet, like something that had been waiting without either of them knowing it. Then it was over. Graham stepped back first. Ruth lowered her eyes. Not ashamed. Just done. She stood, adjusted the sleeve over her bandage, and moved back to the stove. No apology, no mention, just the sound of the kettle again. That night, Graham lay awake longer than usual. The lock clicked twice down the hall. The chair dragged, same as before. Nothing had changed, except it had. Morning came gray and thin, frost along the fence posts, the kind that melted slow. Graham stepped into the kitchen. Coffee already poured, bread sliced, eggs on the pan. Ruth stood by the stove, her left hand wrapped clean, moving like it hadn't happened at all. She didn't look at him, didn't say anything. Just slid the plate across the table. Same as the day before. Same as if the night had never been. Graham sat down, picked up his fork, and watched the steam rise from his cup. He didn't ask. She didn't tell. But when he stepped outside later, he found himself looking back at the kitchen window. She was still there, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the house was empty behind him. The feeling didn't last. By the end of the week, word had made its way down to Dry Creek Crossing. It always did. A man living alone for years suddenly had a woman in his kitchen, folks noticed. Graham rode into town early one morning, frost still clinging to the fence posts, the sky pale and stretched thin. He tied his horse outside Miller's General Store and stepped inside. The bell above the door gave a tired ring. Old Mrs. Miller looked up from behind the counter. She didn't smile right away, just studied him the way folks did when they knew something he hadn't said yet. "You got company now," she said, like she was commenting on the weather. Graham picked up a sack of flour. "I gotta cook." She wrapped twine around a bundle of dried beans. "That what folks are calling her?" He didn't answer. Behind him, a chair scraped. Sheriff Amos Keller leaned back against the wall, hat tipped low, watching. "Morning, Tate." Graham nodded once. "Sheriff?" Keller stepped forward slow, boots soft on the worn floorboards. He didn't reach for his badge. Didn't need to. "Name's Ruth Bellamy?" he asked. "That's right." "She got papers?" Graham set the flour on the counter. "She works. I pay her. That's enough." Keller didn't push. Not yet. He scratched at his jaw, then glanced toward the window like he had all the time in the world. "Had some riders pass through yesterday," he said, "asking questions." Graham's hand paused on the coin pouch. "What kind of questions?" Keller shrugged. "Looking for a woman. Didn't give much more than that. Said she knew how to sew. Said she'd worked in a big house down south. Mrs. Miller stopped tying twine. The room went quiet. Graham dropped 2 coins on the counter. Plenty of women can sew. Not many head this far west alone, Keller said. Graham picked up the flour and beans. Then they're looking in the wrong place. He left before the sheriff said anything else. The ride back felt longer. Wind came down from the ridge, cutting through his coat. He kept his eyes on the road, but his mind stayed behind in that store, in the way Keller hadn't pushed, like he didn't need to. When Graham reached the ranch, the gate stood just as he'd left it. The house, too. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin, steady. Inside, Ruth stood at the stove, same as always, same quiet rhythm, same careful movements. She didn't ask where he'd been. He set the flour down, watched her for a second. "You got folks looking for you," he said. The spoon paused in her hand, just for a breath. Then it moved again. "I figured," she said. No surprise, no fear in her voice, just acknowledgement. "You planning on telling me why?" Graham asked. She didn't turn. "Does it change the work?" Graham leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Might." She set the spoon down, slow, wiped her hands on a cloth. Then she turned. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked straight at him. Not quick, not guarded, just steady. "I came here to work," she said. "That hasn't changed." Graham held her gaze, waited. She didn't offer anything more. Outside, a horse snorted. Both of them turned. Graham stepped out onto the porch. The yard stretched empty, but dust still hung in the air near the far fence. Someone had been close. Close enough to watch, not close enough to be seen. He stood there a long time. When he went back inside, Ruth had already moved the kettle off the fire. The room smelled faintly of coffee and something darker, like the air before a storm. That night, the lock clicked twice again. The chair dragged. But Graham didn't lie back down right away. He sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the wind push against the walls. And for the first time, he wondered not who she was, but what had followed her here. Morning came quiet. Too quiet. Graham stepped into the kitchen. The fire was still warm. The kettle sat half full. A cup rested beside it, steam long gone. The back door stood open just enough to let the cold slip in. He stepped outside. Tracks led away from the house. Not running, not stumbling, just steady steps, heading toward the low ridge beyond the corral. Something snagged on the fence caught his eye. A strip of black cloth. He walked over, pulled it free, held it between his fingers. The wind picked up again, dragging dust across the yard. Graham looked out toward the ridge, then back at the house, then at the cloth in his hand. He didn't call her name, didn't saddle the horse right away, just stood there, breathing slow, like a man who knew something had already begun and wasn't going to stop. Graham folded the strip of cloth once, then tucked it into his coat pocket. He didn't rush. That wasn't his way. He stepped back inside, poured what was left of the cold coffee into the sink, then reached for his hat. His gloves were still damp from the morning frost. He pulled them on anyway. Outside, the air had sharpened, the kind that carried sound farther than it should. He saddled his bay gelding without a word. The leather creaked. The horse shifted, sensing something different in the man's hands. Graham followed the tracks on foot at first. They were clear, too clear. Ruth hadn't tried to hide them. Boot prints, even steps, not hurried, not wandering, like she knew exactly where she was going. The trail led past the corral, over the low ridge where the ground turned hard and gray. Patches of snow clung in the shade, the kind that kept a mark longer than it should. He mounted after a while, letting the horse take some of the ground. The tracks dipped into a narrow draw where wind had cut through the land like a blade. There, something glinted. Graham dismounted. Half buried near a rock lay a small silver spoon. He picked it up, brushed the dirt away with his thumb. He'd seen it before. She kept it by her place at the table, never used the others. He turned it once in his hand, then slipped it into his pocket beside the cloth. The wind picked up, pushing cold down into the draw. Graham looked ahead. The tracks wavered there, one step deeper than the last. A scuff along the edge. She'd stumbled. Not much, just enough to leave a mark. He followed. By midday, the sun had climbed but gave no warmth. The land opened into a stretch of scrub and broken stone, a place cattle avoided when they could. Up ahead, a shape leaned against the horizon. An old rest shack, half-collapsed roof, door hanging loose on one hinge. Graham rode closer, then slowed. Smoke had touched that place once, not long ago. He tied the horse to a post that barely held and stepped inside. The air carried a faint smell of ash. On the ground, near the far wall, a small pile of wood chips, clean cuts, not weathered. Someone had split kindling there. He knelt, ran his fingers across the floor, cold, but not untouched. She was here, he said, though no one stood to hear it. A voice came from the doorway. "Couple days back." Graham turned. An old man stood there, wrapped in a worn coat, beard thin and gray. A mule waited behind him, head low. "Didn't hear you ride in," Graham said. "Didn't aim to be heard." The man stepped inside, slow. "Name's Ezekiel Boone." Graham nodded once. "Graham Tate." Boone glanced around the shack, then down at the wood chips. "She come through here. Late afternoon. Didn't stay long." "Alone?" "Alone." Boone scratched at his cheek. "Didn't carry near enough for the cold. Didn't ask for help neither." Graham's jaw tightened. "Which way'd she go?" Boone pointed with his chin. "Up past the ridge. Bad ground up there. Folks who know it don't take it this time of year." Graham stepped back toward the door. "Why would she go that way?" he asked. Boone shrugged. "Maybe she didn't want to be found." The words sat heavy in the air. Graham untied his horse. Boone watched him mount. "You chasing her?" Graham settled into the saddle. "I'm finding her." Boone nodded once, like that was enough. The climb grew harder. The ground turned uneven, broken by stone and patches of ice that hid beneath dust. The horse moved careful now, each step placed, not given. By late afternoon, the tracks thinned. Wind had come through here, taken what it could. Graham dismounted again, walked ahead, eyes low, scanning. There. Faint. Just enough. A heel mark pressed deeper than the rest. She'd slipped again. He followed that sign, and another. Then the trail bent, sharp, not along the ridge, off it, toward the higher ground, toward rock and shadow where even the sun didn't stay long. Graham stopped, looked up. That wasn't the way to town. It wasn't the way to water. It wasn't the way anyone would choose, unless they meant to disappear. He stood there a moment, the wind cutting across his coat, the horse shifting behind him. Then he turned the reins in his hand and followed her anyway. The climb took what daylight was left. The ground turned mean underfoot, loose stone, thin ice hiding in shadow. The horse slowed, ears flicking, testing each step before putting weight down. Graham didn't push it. He slid down after a while and led the horse by the reins, boots scraping against rock. The wind came harder up here. It carried a low sound, like something moving far off. Though there was nothing but ridge and sky, he stopped once, listened. Nothing but wind again. He kept going. The tracks were near gone now. Only guesses. A scuff here. A broken edge there. Enough for a man who paid attention. Near dusk, he saw it. A line of dark against the pale stone. A shack. No bigger than a storage shed. Roof half caved, one wall leaning into the mountain like it had given up trying to stand straight. Smoke didn't rise from it, but the door was shut. Graham tied the horse to a twisted post and walked up slow. He didn't knock, just pushed the door open with the back of his hand. Inside, the air held heat. Faint, but there. Ruth sat on the ground near a small fire, wrapped in a worn blanket. One leg stretched out stiff, a strip of cloth tied around her ankle, already darkened through. She didn't reach for anything, didn't move to stand, just looked at him. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You shouldn't have come," she said. Her voice was steady, not loud, not weak. Graham closed the door behind him, set his hat on a nail near the wall. "You left my kitchen a mess," he said. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, not quite anything else. "I fixed it before I went." He stepped closer, crouched by the fire, held his hands out to the heat, though he didn't seem to feel it. "You're hurt. It'll hold." He reached for the kettle sitting beside the coals, poured what little water was left into a tin cup, and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers brushed his. Brief, careful. "I wasn't followed," she said after a while. "I made sure of that." Graham nodded once. "You don't come up here unless you want to be lost." That was the idea. Silence settled again. The fire popped once, then went back to a low glow. "They're looking for you," he said. "I know." He didn't ask how. "They came through town," he added, asking questions. She looked at the fire, not at him. "They always do." Graham leaned back slightly, studying her. "You could have stayed," he said. "No." She shook her head once. "Not with you there." He frowned, just a little. "Doesn't make sense." "It does." She finally looked up at him. "You just don't want it to." The wind pressed against the walls, a long, low sound. She set the cup aside. "I worked for the Rourkes," she said. "House up south of Cheyenne. Big place. Too big for what they claimed to own." Graham said nothing. They took land that wasn't theirs. Papers signed in rooms where no one was allowed to read them twice. Her voice stayed even. "I saw it. More than once. You're a witness. I'm the only one left who can say it plain." Graham's jaw set. "They won't let that stand," he said. "No." She folded her hands together, steadying them. "They won't." Another pause. "I didn't leave because I was afraid of them," she went on. "I left because if they came to your place looking for me, they'd find a reason to stay." Graham looked at her a long time. "You think I can't handle a few men on horses?" "I think you've got land they'd like to claim," she said, "and a name that doesn't ask for trouble. That don't mean I run from it." "I didn't say run." Her eyes held his now. "I said I wouldn't make you carry it for me." The words settled between them. Graham reached for a piece of wood, set it on the fire, watched the flame catch slow. "You done talking?" he asked. "For now." "Good." He stood, walked to the door, checked the latch without opening it. Outside, faint, distant, the sound of hooves. Ruth heard it too. Her hand tightened against the floor. "They're early," she said. Graham turned back, calm as before. "No," he said. "We're just not late." She pushed herself up, wincing once as her weight shifted. "I can move," she said. He stepped closer. Not touching. Not yet. No, he answered. She looked at him, something sharp in her gaze now. I won't be carried out of here like… You won't. His voice stayed low, certain. You'll walk, and I'll be right there. The sound outside grew clearer. Not many horses, but enough. Ruth took a breath. Slow, steady. Then she nodded. And for the first time since he'd found her, she didn't look like she was getting ready to leave. The sound of horses came closer. Slow, measured, not a rush. Men who believed they already had the upper hand. Graham stepped toward the door and opened it just enough to see. 3 riders, one of them he knew. Sheriff Amos Keller sat straight in his saddle, hat low, eyes already on the shack. Beside him, a man in a long coat, cleaner than the land allowed, Clint Rourke. The third kept back, watching. No one reached for a weapon. Not yet. Graham stepped outside fully, closing the door behind him with a quiet hand. Cold air cut sharp across his face. Evening, Sheriff, he said. Keller gave a short nod. Mr. Tate. Rourke didn't nod, just looked at the place like it already belonged to him. She's inside, Keller said. Not a question. Graham didn't answer. Rourke shifted in his saddle. This doesn't have to turn into something messy, he said. His voice carried easy, practiced. We're here to bring a woman back where she belongs. Graham's gaze didn't move. Ain't your place to decide that. Rourke smiled faintly. Everything out here is someone's place to decide. That's how things get settled. Before Graham could answer, the door opened behind him. Ruth stepped out. She didn't lean on anything, didn't hide behind him, just stood, one hand resting against the doorframe for balance. Keller's eyes flicked to her, then back to Graham. Rourke's smile widened a fraction. There you are, he said. Ruth didn't return it. I'm here, she said, her voice steady despite the wind. You don't need to step any closer. Keller shifted in his saddle. Miss Bellamy, he said, quieter now. We've got claims made against you, and statements that might need hearing. I know what I've seen, she replied, and I know what I'm willing to say. Rourke let out a soft breath, like something amused him. Careful, he said. Words carry weight, sometimes more than the person speaking them. Ruth took one step forward. Graham didn't stop her. I'm not carrying anyone else's weight, she said. Not anymore. The wind lifted the edge of her coat. For a second, she looked unsteady, but she didn't step back. Keller looked between them, then down at the ground, thinking. You come with me, he said finally to Ruth. We take this to town. No need for anything else out here. Rourke's jaw tightened just a little. That's a long road for a matter already clear, he said. Keller didn't look at him. That's the road we're taking. Silence stretched. Then Rourke gave a small shrug like it didn't matter. Suit yourself. He turned his horse first. The other rider followed. Ruth let out a breath she hadn't shown she was holding. Graham stepped closer, just enough to be near, not touching. Keller waited. You riding? He asked her. She nodded once. Graham moved to bring his horse around, steadying the stirrup without a word. Ruth climbed up slower than usual. Her hand brushed his shoulder for balance. He didn't look up, just held still until she settled. The ride back to Silver Mesa took most of the night. No one spoke much. The town lights came into view just before dawn. Inside the sheriff's office, things were written down. Names, dates, statements, ink scratching against paper that would outlast all of them. Ruth spoke when asked. Clear, simple, no extra words. Graham stayed outside, leaning against the post across the street, watching the door. A man passed him once, then again, like he had something to say. Graham didn't look up. By mid-morning, the door opened. Ruth stepped out. Free to leave. Free to stay. She paused when she saw him there. He pushed off the post, walked over. "You're done?" he asked. "For now." He nodded. They stood there a moment. Town moving around them. Wagons rolling past. A dog barking somewhere behind the general store. "I won't bring trouble back with me," she said. Graham looked past her toward the open road. "Trouble finds its way," he said. "Don't matter much where you stand." She studied him, like she was measuring something she hadn't finished thinking through. "I don't owe you anything," she said. "I know." He didn't step closer, didn't reach for her, just stood there, same as before. A choice, not a pull. Ruth turned, walked a few steps down the street, stopped. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of coffee and wood smoke from somewhere nearby. She looked at her hands, then back at him. No words. She walked past him. Not away. Past him. Toward the road that led back to the ranch. Graham waited a second, then followed. Not close, not far. When they reached the house, the door still hung the way he'd left it. Inside, the kitchen held the same quiet it always had. Ruth stepped in first, looked around, then moved to the counter. Her hand rested on the edge, fingers brushing the worn wood. She reached for the knife, set it back where it had been before she left, perfectly straight. Graham stood in the doorway, didn't say anything. She glanced at the stove, the cold pan, the empty kettle. Then she moved. Slow, certain, like she'd already made the choice somewhere along the road. Outside, the wind eased. Inside, the fire caught again. And for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like something waiting to be left behind. It wasn't the fire that changed that place, or the sound of a second set of footsteps across the floor. It was the quiet way two people chose to stay. Graham didn't ask her to remain. Ruth didn't promise she always would. But the door stopped closing twice at night. The table held 2 cups instead of 1. And the kind of silence that once felt heavy began to feel like rest. Out on the range, nothing ever truly stands still. Storms come. Land changes. People leave when they have to. But sometimes, someone stays. Not because they're held there, but because they finally found a place where leaving isn't the only way to survive. Maybe that's what this was never really about. Not a man saving a woman. Not a woman running from her past. Just 2 people learning that love doesn't have to be loud to be real, and that the strongest thing a person can do is choose to stand beside someone without owning them, without losing themselves. So if you were standing where they stood, would you have walked away or stayed when it mattered most? If this story stayed with you, there are more like it waiting. Quiet ones, deep ones, the kind that linger a little longer than you expect. You're always welcome to come back and sit by the fire again.